Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man alive, ruler of an empire that stretched across 3 continents, sat alone in his tent on the frozen frontier of the Roman Empire. Enemies pressed against his borders. Plague ravaged his cities. His own generals plotted against him. And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, he picked up a pen and wrote himself a single, brutal question. Why do you let the actions of other people disturb your own peace? He wasn't writing for an audience. He wasn't writing for history. He was writing because he was angry, and he knew that anger, left unchecked, could destroy everything he had built. What he discovered that night, and on countless nights after, wasn't a trick or a technique. It was a complete rewiring of how a human being relates to frustration, insult, and rage. And here's the strange part. Almost 2,000 years later, modern psychologists studying cognitive behavioral therapy would stumble onto the exact same principles, without even realizing an emperor had already written them down in a journal never meant to be published. Today, that journal survives. We call it Meditations, and buried inside it, along with the writings of 2 other Stoic philosophers, a former slave named Epictetus and a Roman statesman named Seneca, lies one of the most practical anger management systems ever created. Not a system built in a therapist's office, not a system built in a lab, a system forged in the middle of war, betrayal, exile, and loss. By the time you finish this video, you will know 7 of these techniques. 7 simple, almost embarrassingly obvious tools that ancient philosophers used to stay calm while the world around them was falling apart. And I want to warn you now, the 7th one is the one that changes everything. The one thing that once you understand it, you will never look at your own anger the same way again. So stay with me, because we're going to start with something that sounds almost too simple to work, and yet it is the exact reason most people stay trapped in anger for years, sometimes decades, without ever escaping it. Here is the first truth the Stoics understood better than almost anyone in human history. It is never the event itself that makes you angry. It is the judgment you attach to that event. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your coworker takes credit for your work. Your partner says something careless and cutting. In each of these moments, you believe, with total certainty, that the situation itself is the source of your rage. But Epictetus, writing centuries before modern psychology existed, said something that should be taught in every school on earth. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. Read that again. It is not the traffic. It is your belief that you deserve to never be delayed. It is not the coworker. It is your belief that credit must always be assigned fairly and immediately. It is not the careless comment. It is your belief that the people you love should always speak with perfect precision. Strip away the belief, and the event becomes strangely, almost eerily, powerless. This is not a call to suppress your feelings or pretend nothing bothers you. The Stoics were not emotionless robots. Despite what pop culture has turned them into, they felt anger rise in their chest just like you do. The difference is what happened in the half-second after that rise. In that half-second, a Stoic would ask a single question. What did I just tell myself about this event that made it feel like an attack? Once you start asking that question, something remarkable happens. You realize that 90% of your anger throughout the day is not caused by other people. It is caused by an invisible list of rules you carry around in your head about how the world is supposed to behave. Rules nobody else agreed to follow. The driver who cut you off never agreed to your rule that lanes must be respected at all times. Your coworker never agreed to your rule that credit must be split evenly. The moment you see these as your own private expectations, rather than universal laws of the universe, the anger loses its fuel. It doesn't disappear instantly, but it stops controlling you. This is the first tool, catching the judgment before it becomes the emotion. Ancient Stoic teachers had a name for the tiny gap between an event and your reaction to it. They called it the space where freedom lies, because in that space, and only in that space, you get to choose your response instead of simply reacting like an animal driven by instinct. Seneca, in his letters, described watching a man become violently angry over a spilled cup of wine, something so small it barely deserves a second thought. And yet the man screamed and threw furniture, as though his entire household had betrayed him. Seneca's observation was simple and devastating. The man wasn't angry about the wine. He was angry because he believed, deep down, that inconvenience was an insult to his dignity. That belief, not the wine, was the true source of his suffering. This single shift in understanding that your judgments create your anger far more than external events do is the foundation everything else in this video is built on. Without grasping this first truth, none of the following 6 techniques will make sense, because you'll still be looking for the source of your anger outside yourself. In traffic, in coworkers, in careless words, when the entire time the real switch was sitting quietly inside your own mind, waiting for you to notice it. In part 2, we are going to reveal the second tool, one that Marcus Aurelius used every single morning before facing the chaos of running an empire, a technique so simple that most people dismiss it as too easy to actually work, and yet it is one of the most cited practices across every surviving Stoic text we have. Every single morning, before the sun rose over Rome, before the petitions and the wars and the betrayals began, Marcus Aurelius did something that sounds almost masochistic at first glance. He sat quietly and imagined, in vivid detail, all the difficult people he was about to encounter that day. Not to dread them, not to build resentment before it even happened. He did it to disarm them in advance. In his own words, preserved in Meditations, he told himself something close to this today: I will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and unsociable. He wasn't being pessimistic. He was doing something far smarter. He was removing the element of surprise from anger. Think about why anger catches us so completely off guard in daily life. Someone insults you unexpectedly, and your whole body reacts before your mind even processes what happened. Your heart rate spikes. Your face flushes. Words come out of your mouth that you regret within seconds. This happens because the event blindsided you. You were expecting a normal day, and instead you got an ambush. Marcus understood that the mind reacts far more violently to the unexpected than to the anticipated. So he flipped the entire equation. Instead of hoping the day would go smoothly and getting shocked when it didn't, he assumed difficulty in advance and mentally rehearsed his response to it. This technique had a name among the Stoics. Modern scholars call it premeditatio malorum, which translates roughly to the premeditation of evils, though that phrase makes it sound far darker than it actually is in practice. It is not about assuming the worst will happen and living in fear. It is about mentally walking through possible frustrations so that when they do happen, and they always do, you already have a rehearsed, calm response ready to go, instead of a raw, unprepared nervous system reacting on pure instinct. Think of it like an actor who has rehearsed a scene so many times that no matter what a scene partner improvises, the actor never breaks character. The actor isn't caught off guard because they've already imagined multiple versions of how the scene could unfold. Marcus was doing the exact same thing, except the stage was his empire, and the scene partners were generals, senators, and enemies who wanted him dead. Here is the version of this practice you can use today, and it takes less than 5 minutes each morning. Before you check your phone, before the noise of the day begins, sit quietly and ask yourself, who might frustrate me today, and what might they do? Maybe it's a family member who always brings up the same painful topic at dinner. Maybe it's a boss who tends to criticize your work in front of others. Maybe it's a stranger on the road who cuts you off without a second thought. Picture the moment clearly. Picture their words, their tone, their expression. And then, instead of stopping there, imagine yourself responding with total calm. Not suppressed anger. Not a fake smile hiding rage underneath. Actual, grounded calm, because you already knew this moment was coming, and you already decided in advance that it would not control you. This is fundamentally different from how most people approach their day, which is hoping nothing goes wrong, and then feeling personally attacked the instant something does. The Stoics flipped this completely. They expected friction as a basic feature of being human, living among other humans, all of whom have their own flaws, insecurities, and bad days. Epictetus put it even more bluntly when he said that if you kiss your child or your spouse goodbye in the morning, you should remind yourself that you are kissing a mortal being, not because you should live in constant fear of loss, but because that awareness makes every interaction sharper, more grounded, and less prone to being poisoned by pointless irritation over trivial matters. When you expect imperfection from the world, you stop being ambushed by it. And when you stop being ambushed by it, you stop reacting with the kind of explosive anger that comes from shock and betrayal, because nothing actually betrayed you. It happened exactly as you quietly prepared for. There's a modern parallel worth mentioning here, because it shows just how far ahead of its time the Stoic technique really was. Athletes today use something called visualization training, where they mentally rehearse difficult moments in competition long before they happen. A missed shot, a bad call from a referee, an unexpected setback, specifically so that their nervous system doesn't panic when it actually occurs in real time. Sports psychologists spent decades researching and refining this. Marcus Aurelius was doing it 2,000 years earlier, not for a game, but for his own emotional survival while running one of the largest empires in human history. This is the second tool, rehearsing difficulty before it arrives, so that when frustration inevitably knocks on your door, you open it already composed instead of scrambling for control after the damage is done. But rehearsing for difficult moments is only half the equation. What do you actually do in the exact instant someone says something that makes your blood boil, when there was no time to prepare, when it catches you mid-conversation with absolutely zero warning? For that, the Stoics had a third tool, one built entirely around a single, deceptively simple physical action, and it's the technique that Seneca himself credited with saving him from decisions he would have deeply regretted. Seneca once wrote about the single most dangerous decision a person can ever make, and it wasn't a decision about money, or war, or politics. It was the decision to act while angry. He called anger a temporary madness, and he meant that phrase with total seriousness, not as a poetic exaggeration. In his essay simply titled On Anger, he described how rage hijacks the very part of the brain responsible for reason, the same part that would normally stop you from saying something cruel or doing something irreversible. Once anger takes hold, Seneca argued, you are no longer fully yourself. You are operating under the control of an emotion that has, for a brief window of time, replaced your judgment entirely. And here is the piece of advice he gave that has survived for nearly 2,000 years, quoted by philosophers, therapists, and even modern anger management programs without most people realizing where it originally came from. The greatest remedy for anger is delay. Not suppression, not denial, delay. Seneca instructed his readers that when anger first strikes, the very first and most important action is to do absolutely nothing. Say nothing. Decide nothing. Send no message, throw no punch, write no email. Simply create distance in time between the emotional spike and any action that follows it. Why does this work so well? Because anger, biologically speaking, behaves like a wave. It rises sharply, peaks within a matter of seconds to a few minutes, and then, if given no fuel, begins to fall on its own. Modern neuroscience actually backs this up almost exactly. Research on emotional regulation shows that the physiological arousal caused by intense anger, the racing heart, the flushed skin, the tunnel vision, typically begins to subside within roughly 90 seconds if you don't feed it with more angry thoughts or aggressive action. Seneca had no laboratory, no brain scans, no research papers. He had 2,000 years less scientific data than we do today, and yet he arrived at almost the exact same conclusion purely through observation of his own emotional patterns, the patterns of people around him. His advice was almost embarrassingly simple. When you feel anger rising, count before you speak. Some versions of Stoic teaching suggest literally counting to a number in your head before allowing yourself to respond to whatever triggered you. It sounds almost too basic to be effective, the kind of advice a grandmother might give you. And yet its simplicity is exactly why it works so reliably. Complicated techniques fail in the heat of the moment, because anger destroys your ability to think clearly and follow complex instructions. But counting requires no complex thought. It requires no analysis. It simply creates a gap, a small buffer of time between stimulus and response, and inside that tiny gap lies your entire ability to choose differently. Seneca described watching powerful men, generals and senators, destroy their reputations, their friendships, and sometimes their lives, because they acted in the first 10 seconds of rage instead of waiting even a few minutes. He wrote about how, if given even a short pause, those same men almost always regretted what they were about to do and chose a completely different, far wiser path. The tragedy, he noted, is that the pause was always available to them. They simply never used it. This is worth sitting with for a moment. How many arguments have you had that would have ended completely differently if you had waited just 60 seconds before responding? How many texts, emails, or comments have you sent in anger that you deleted, regretted, or wished you could take back the moment you hit send? The pause is available to every single one of us, in every single moment of anger, and yet almost nobody uses it, because in the heat of the moment, waiting feels unbearable. Anger creates an illusion of urgency. It tells you that you must respond right now, that any delay is weakness, that the person in front of you deserves to feel your rage immediately. But this urgency is a lie your emotions are telling you. Nothing catastrophic happens if you wait 10 seconds, or 60 seconds, or even an hour before responding to something that upset you. In fact, almost every situation improves with that delay, because you respond from a place of clarity, rather than from a place of temporary madness. To use Seneca's own words, there's a practical version of this you can start using today, and it requires no special training. The moment you feel that familiar heat rising in your chest, that tightening in your jaw, that urge to snap back, immediately, simply say to yourself, "Not yet." Just those two words. Not yet. You are not suppressing the anger. You are not pretending it isn't there. You are simply refusing to let it drive the car for even one more second. You can still respond. You can still address whatever upsets you. But you do it after the wave has crested and begun to fall, not while you're still being tossed around inside it. This is the third tool the Stoics left behind: delay as a weapon against your own worst impulses. Not delay forever, not avoidance. Just enough space for the temporary madness to pass so that the real you, the thinking, reasoning, values-driven you, gets to make the decision instead of the reactive animal brain that took over for a few seconds. But even with this pause in place, there's still a deeper question lurking underneath all of this. Why does anger arise so intensely in the first place, even before you have a chance to pause? The Stoics had an answer for that too, and it involves a concept most people have never heard of, but use every single day without realizing it. A concept about what actually belongs to you and what never did in the first place. Epictetus began his entire philosophy, the one that would go on to influence emperors, soldiers, and modern therapists alike, with a single dividing line. He called it the dichotomy of control, and once you understand it, you will realize it is the hidden root beneath every single technique we've covered so far. The idea is almost insultingly simple on the surface. Some things are within your control. Everything else is not. Your opinions, your desires, your reactions, your effort, these belong to you. Other people's actions, their words, their opinions of you, the weather, the traffic, the economy, these do not belong to you, no matter how much you wish they did. Epictetus argued that almost all human suffering and almost all human anger comes from confusing these two categories. We get angry at traffic as though we had the right to control it. We get angry at other people's opinions as though we had the right to dictate them. We get angry at outcomes we worked hard for, but didn't receive, as though effort alone should guarantee results. In every one of these cases, the anger comes from believing we had authority over something that was never actually ours to command. This single realization, once it truly sinks in, quietly dismantles anger from the inside out. Because you stop fighting battles you were never equipped to win in the first place. This brings us to the remaining tools, each one a direct application of this dividing line, and each one deceptively small in practice, but enormous in effect. The fourth tool is what the Stoics called viewing things from above, mentally zooming out from your immediate frustration to see it from a wider vantage point, the way Marcus Aurelius would remind himself that in 100 years, none of the people currently irritating him would even be remembered, and neither would he. Try it the next time something small enrages you. Ask yourself if this will matter in 5 years. Most of the time, the honest answer is no, and that honesty alone drains the anger of its power. The fifth tool is turning the mirror inward before pointing a finger outward. The Stoics constantly reminded themselves that they too had been thoughtless, selfish, or careless toward others at some point, which made it far harder to hold blazing contempt for someone else's flaws. Marcus literally wrote to himself that he too does many things wrong, and is a man like the rest. The sixth tool is remembering that the angry person suffers more than anyone they're angry at. Seneca described anger as drinking poison and expecting the other person to feel the pain. When you truly absorb that image, that your rage is hurting your own body, your own peace, your own day, far more than it's hurting whoever triggered it, staying angry stops feeling like justice and starts feeling like self-punishment. And now, the seventh tool, the one I promised would change everything. It isn't a technique at all in the traditional sense. It's a complete reversal of how you've been taught to think about anger from childhood. Most of us were raised to believe that anger is a signal that we've been wronged, that our anger is proof of injustice, and that expressing it forcefully is how we protect our dignity. The Stoics discovered something almost the opposite. They discovered that anger is never a sign of strength. It is always, without exception, a sign that something you believed you controlled has slipped outside of your control. Every single flash of rage you have ever felt, every one, without a single exception, traces back to this exact moment, the moment you realized, even if only subconsciously, that reality was refusing to obey your expectations. The driver refused to obey your expectation of respectful lane changes. Your coworker refused to obey your expectation of fair credit. Your partner refused to obey your expectation of careful words. Once you see this pattern clearly, you can no longer view your own anger the same way again, because you realize it was never really about the other person at all. It was about the gap between what you demanded from reality and what reality actually gave you. And the moment you stop demanding that reality behave according to your private rule book, the anger has nothing left to attach itself to. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting injustice or letting people walk over you. The Stoics were soldiers, senators, and statesmen who took decisive action constantly. But they acted from clarity, not from rage, because they understood that rage clouds judgment while calm sharpens it. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire through plague and war, without losing himself to fury. Seneca advised emperors and survived political exile without being consumed by bitterness. Epictetus was born a slave, endured a permanently damaged leg from his own master's cruelty, and still became one of the calmest, most respected teachers in the ancient world. If these men, living through hardships, far beyond what most of us will ever face, could master this temporary madness Seneca warned us about, then the anger you feel over traffic, over comments online, over the small daily frictions of modern life, was never as unmanageable as it felt in the moment. It only needed a mind willing to ask better questions before reacting. That is the real gift the Stoics left behind. Not a promise of never feeling angry again, but a set of tools sharp enough to keep that anger from ever running your life. So here we are, at the end of a journey that started with a Roman emperor sitting alone in a war tent, angry, exhausted, and searching for a way to keep his own mind from turning against him. We've walked through 7 tools, but if you strip away the language, the history, and the philosophy, what you're really left with is a single, quiet truth: anger was never as powerful as it made itself feel. It only ever borrowed its strength from your own beliefs, your own expectations, your own unexamined rules about how the world was supposed to behave. The moment you start questioning those rules, instead of blindly obeying them, anger loses its grip, not all at once, not perfectly, but steadily, the way a fire dies down once you stop feeding it fuel. Think back to everything we've covered. Catching the judgment before it becomes the emotion. Rehearsing difficulty each morning so nothing catches you off guard. Using delay as a weapon against your own worst impulses. Zooming out to see how small most irritations really are in the grand scope of a life. Turning the mirror on yourself before judging someone else. Remembering that rage punishes you far more than it punishes anyone else. And finally, understanding that anger is never proof of being wrong. It's only proof that reality refused to follow a rule you quietly wrote for it. None of these tools require you to become a different person overnight. They don't ask you to suppress what you feel or pretend to be endlessly patient. They ask something much simpler and much harder at the same time: to notice. To notice the half-second before the reaction. To notice the belief hiding underneath the emotion. To notice that you have a choice, even when your body is screaming that you don't. Marcus Aurelius never claimed to master this completely. If you read Meditations closely, you'll see a man still wrestling with his own irritation, still reminding himself of the same lessons over and over, page after page, year after year. That repetition isn't a sign of failure. It's the whole point. Calm isn't a personality trait some people are born with and others aren't. It's a practice, rebuilt daily, sometimes hourly, by people who understood that the mind, left untrained, will always default to reacting instead of choosing. So if today, or tomorrow, or an hour from now, someone says something that makes your chest tighten and your jaw clench, you don't have to fight the anger. You don't have to shame yourself for feeling it. You simply have to remember there's a gap, however small, between what just happened and what you do next. And in that gap, quietly, patiently, 2,000 years of philosophy are waiting to remind you, you were never actually angry at them. You were angry at a rule you forgot you made up. Let it go, and watch how much lighter the rest of your day suddenly feels. If this gave you something to sit with, that's really all a video like this can hope to do. The rest happens the next time something small tries to set you off.